Virginia Woolf, an English author, modern English novelist, she wrote a very interesting book, A Room of One's Own. And in this book, there's a chapter. In this chapter, she discusses the life of a marginalized woman, Shakespeare's sister, Judith. She tells you how Judith suffered at her time. She was Shakespeare's sister, but her parents did not treat her the same as her brother. They allowed her brother, Shakespeare, to read books, but she was not allowed to touch a book. You're supposed to stay home and do the household chores, do the mopping, the washing, and all that. No reading for you. The parents allowed Shakespeare to go to school, but they prevented her from going to school. They grounded her. No school for you. She wanted, she was talented and also very good, but she did not have the chance to show herself to the world, to write, to do something, to practice her skills. And then they forced her into marriage. Her father forced her to marry someone she didn't love. Finally, her patience snapped and she decided to run away. So she ran away from home. She decided to depend on herself. And she wanted to work in the theater. Again, she faced another problem. One of the theater managers promised her a job in the theater. He said, I'm going to take care of you and I'll give you a job. But it turned out that he was a trickster. He broke his promise, but he also made her pregnant and left her. So now she doesn't know what to do. She's disappointed in everything. And she has zero hope in everybody. She can't trust anybody, and she sank into despair and depression. And finally, she committed suicide. And she was buried, where she was found on the side of a road. They just buried, people found her on the side of a road and buried her there. Nobody paid any attention to her. While, Shakespeare was prospering and becoming famous and wrote more and more plays and had more and more audience and fans, at the same time. So this story of Shakespeare's sister, told by Virginia Woolf, also shows you how the world is not fair towards women. From what we said above, we know now the causes that led to feminism. So towards the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, women said, that's enough. We want our rights. So women started calling for their rights. They said, we've been wronged all those ages. Well, at least give us some rights. This movement is called feminism. When women at the beginning of the 20th century started calling for their rights, for equality, they wanted to be equal to men. And this social and political movement or ideology is called feminism. So that's the meaning of feminism. But there's a little difference between feminism as a social and political movement and the feminist literary theory. Feminism has nothing to do with literature. Feminism is a social and political movement which started at the beginning of the 20th century. And its goal was to make women equal to men, which we call gender equality. It called for gender equality. But feminist literary theory started like 50 years after that. So 50 years later, in the middle of the 20th century, 1960s, we have this theory. Of course, it's based on feminism because the feminist literary theory derives its principles from feminism, but it's a smaller version of the theory, and made to adapt to literature. So that's the difference between, saying feminism and saying feminist literary theory. Feminist literary theory is based on feminism, but remember that it is a theory which derives its principles from feminism, but it's a theory that you can use to apply to literature in order to understand literature better. At this point, it's important to distinguish between feminist theory and gender theory. Now, when you say feminist theory, we're talking about women and women's rights. Feminist theory shows you how women do not have their rights like men, and women are controlled by men, and women should be equal to men. This is feminism. Gender theory is different. Gender theory is not only related to women, it's related to both women and men. That's why it's called gender theory. It concerns both men and women. Gender theory tries to show how gender affects literature. Like, for example, how women and men differ in their writing. Example, when a man writes a novel, it's not the same as when a woman writes a novel. The relationship between literature and gender, that's called gender theory or gender studies. It's a bit, I know they're related. I mean, definitely, of course, feminist theory and gender theory have some similarities, but I don't want you to confuse them. They're not the same. I just explained the difference between them. So please keep in mind this difference between gender studies and feminist literary theory. Another point you should be careful about is the use of the word feminist. Remember that a feminist does not have to be a woman. Some men also call for women's rights. So a man could defend and call for women's rights and call for the emancipation or freedom, liberty of women. So the word feminist could either be a woman or a man. Contrary to the common belief that a feminist is a female. No, it's not necessary. Another point, there are 2 points on the slide you should be careful about. The other point is extreme feminism. Now, extreme feminism is not really feminism. Extreme feminism is not. True feminism is when you want women to be equal to men. You are not against men or women. You're not against anybody. You are just trying to achieve equality. That's all. You don't hate men. There's no new reason to hate men. What you want is to establish equality and harmony between men and women. You want men and women to live in society peacefully, happily, and in harmony, and to be equal. That's it. It's not like it's not a war. You're not fighting here against men or something. That is extreme feminism. So if somebody tells you, I'm a feminist and I hate men and I believe that women should be better than men, and that's extreme feminism. A true feminist would say, I'm a feminist and I'm trying to establish equality and harmony between men and women, and we all live in the same society, as brothers and sisters in peace and harmony. That is true feminism. Any kind of bias will blind you because you will not be objective, you'll be subjective. Whatever women do, they are right, and whatever men do, it's wrong. That's extreme feminism. It's not healthy. It's not a healthy attitude. Now we come to a theorist and a critic, a very famous theorist and critic, Elaine Schwalter. Uh, she wrote Toward a Feminist Poetics, 1979, and the model she gives about the three phases of the development of women is worth applying to literature. And this is a foundation in feminism, one of the main principles or models for feminism in literary theory. She divides the history of women into three phases. Phases mean stages. So, but I'm not going to use the word stage. I will use phase because she calls it phase. So I'll adopt her term. She says that women went through three phases: the feminine phase, the feminist phase, and the female phase. Now, what does she exactly mean by that? The first one is the feminine phase. This started from the beginning of history up to the end of the 19th century. So this is the longest phase from the beginning of history up to the end of the 19th century. This is the longest phase and the first phase. During this phase, women are weak, submissive, inferior, inactive, and they have no rights compared to men. Men had all the power, authority, and the rights. This is the first phase. It's called the feminine phase. And then there is the next phase, which is called the feminist phase. This started in the 20th century, at the beginning of the 20th century, after the first phase was over. And it continued up to the 70s, like it took like 70 years. So you can think of the first 70 years, the first 3/4 of the 20th century as the feminist phase. During this phase, women called for their rights and they obtained their rights. So during this phase, women said we have to be equal to men. So they started imitating men in everything, even in clothes. So you can see here, like women started cutting their hair short, wearing shirts, even wearing trousers. This is the first time in history that women began to wear trousers like men. The two world wars also played an important part. Why? Because when men were busy fighting the enemy in the on the battlefield, women started working and doing a lot of their work for them in the cities. And you can see from the advertisements that here we can do it, and then asking women to join the war. So this is the first time we have women soldiers, and that's something new. To many people, it was shocking. Today, it's not, but at that time, it was quite shocking. And women were taught to be independent. You should not depend on men. Like, this is a nice advertisement at that time. Like, this advertisement is telling wives that you don't have to depend on your husband to open this bottle from now on, because women used to say, can you open this bottle for me? A wife would tell her husband, can you? So this advertisement, you can do it alone. No need for men in your life. You can be independent. So bottles were invented so that women can open the cover without asking men to help them, right? Marlboro advertisements were dominated by men, of course, but now for the first time, women started smoking, and we have Marlboro ads for women as well. So you see that women started imitating men in everything. I don't know how you're going to think about it, but I think They had this false idea that if you imitate men, you'll be equal. Equality doesn't, it doesn't really necessarily mean imitation. And again, for the first time, we have the Superwoman in the comics, featuring in comics. Before that, we had Superman, Spider-Man, but now we have Superwoman, Supergirl, Spider-Woman, And there were many demonstrations staged calling for the rights of women. And finally, this dream came true, and women at last became equal to men. Not quite equal, but we are still suffering from this gender inequality. Of course, I don't know, probably it's an eternal issue, but at least it's better. Like this phase, the feminist phase, is better than the feminine phase, the first one. The first one, women had no rights at all, zero rights. But at least now, during the feminist phase, according to Elaine Schwalter, women began to earn their rights and to become equal, or at least almost equal to men. And Elaine Schwalter says the third phase is the female phase. Now, this phase started from the 70s, the 1970s, up to now, to the present. This is the last phase. So it's like 50 years. For the last 50 years, we are living this phase in the female phase. And what makes it different from the two other phases? What happened was this. After women, we said in the second phase, women obtained their rights. In this phase, women realized something. They said, why are we imitating men, in everything? Because, when you imitate someone slavishly, you're proving to yourself to be a slave to that person. Where's your personality as a woman? If you keep just imitating men, this doesn't prove that you're equal. On the contrary, it proves that you are inferior to them. You are inferior because you are only following them, imitating them. So they distinguished between imitation and equality. At the beginning, they thought that equality means imitation. So if we imitate men, we'll be equal to them. Then they realized that equality is something, imitation is something else. This phase is called the female phase. So these are the three phases in history, according to Elaine Schwalter. Which one do you think is, in your opinion, the best phase? Which one, in your opinion, is the worst phase? The first phase is the worst because women had no rights at all, zero rights. The third phase is strikes you as the mature one because women try to achieve equality with men without losing their identity as women. Very good. Okay, great. Yes, I agree. And Schwalter says that these three phases are reflected at four levels: the biological level, the linguistic level, the psychological level, and the cultural level. And this is true. At the biological level, of course, we know that men are physically stronger than women. At the cultural level, yes, there are differences between men. And tradition does not treat. But, it's interesting to think of the linguistic level. Even at the linguistic level, there are differences which show bias towards men and against women. So we don't say, when we're writing, we don't say her or his. We say his or her, or he and she, he or she. Tom and Susan, nobody says Susan and Tom. It's Tom and Susan. We place males before females. Every man and woman. We don't say every woman and man. Boys and girls. Have you heard anybody say girls and boys? Man and wife, husband and wife. brothers and sisters. We don't say we're all sisters and brothers. We say we are brothers and males and females, masculine, feminine. Probably the only exception is ladies and gentlemen. It's interesting to read this slide, so read it later on when you have time, and you've got the link to the web page here. You can click the link to, but it's the same. I just copied and pasted it here for easy access. Here we have the three waves of feminism, similar to the three phases of women, but they're called waves of feminism. The aftermath, or what happened after feminism, we have anti-feminism, post-feminism, and masculinism. Feminism, we talked about feminism, but anti-feminism means people who rejected feminism. This means people who did not want women to be equal to men. They were against the emancipation or liberation of women. They wanted women to stay in the first phase, in the feminine phase. So you have all slogans and movement, and mostly it was by men, of course. Some men rejected this idea. So you can see here, one man, one vote. That's it. No voting for women. Or here, like for a husband asking him to show her it's a man's world, or I am a man, so don't forget that. These such movements or ideologies or attitudes are labeled as anti-feminist. Post-feminism is if you achieve your goal. Now, suppose now you have a goal, and suppose you achieve that goal in your life. What are you going to do after that? Like if you ask somebody, what do you want to be? They'll say, I want to be a civil engineer, and I want to design my own house and get married and live in that house. Let's say that this young man will achieve his dream. He will become an engineer, he'll design his own house, and he'll get a very good job and settle down, get married, and live in that house. So he achieved his dream. So now what? What's gonna happen after that? You achieved your dream. So what are you gonna do? What's the next step? This is called post-feminism. Now that women had their rights and are equal to men, what are you gonna do? It's like after you achieve your dream, you have to cherish this dream. You have to maintain this dream. So after women were equal, they have to make sure they are still equal and live up to this equality and make sure that they maintain this equality in all aspects of life. Now, this is a period which is called post-feminism, after feminism. And we also have in some societies masculinism or masculinism, both are correct. Now, because some women went too far with this and they forgot the purpose of feminism, they not only got their rights, they started trespassing on men's rights. It's like, okay, give me my rights. Men give them their rights and they say, give me more. Give me your rights now. So in some societies today, men are suffering because women have all the rights. It's upside down now. So men started calling for their rights because they have lost their rights and they are treated as inferior to women. And we're facing now the fourth wave of feminism. What's happening to feminism and to women at the age of the internet, digital technology? Because in the past, women called for their rights through demonstrations, through paper publications and newspapers. Now we are living in the digital world, and there's the internet. So how can women use the internet or make use of the internet to promote feminism? This is called the fourth wave, you know, because a technology comes in and makes it the fourth wave. The attitude has changed, the views have changed due to the media, because the media has changed. And during the last couple of years, just the last 2 years, we have a new ideology propounded in this book, which is called Zeno Feminism. It's also like the fourth wave of feminism, like how to use technology and how does technology affect feminism, especially, I mean, digital technology, like the internet. Because there's the idea that it is true that digital technology has made the world a smaller world, make us live in a small world, but at the same time, women are isolated from, in reality, they're isolated from socializing, and this is also a problem. So, what are the drawbacks or the weaknesses of feminism? Remember, the most important weakness is extreme feminism bias towards men, bias against men or towards women. Don't fall into this trap. This is a pitfall. Uh, don't be an extreme feminist and show bias against men or towards women. You have to be objective in your application of the theory and avoid exaggeration. Avoid exaggeration in, like, don't uh, defend women, because maybe it's also sometimes, and nobody's perfect. Nobody is 100% a victim. There should be something to blame, and don't blame also men for what they're doing, because probably uh, they also, some of them, especially characters in novels, not all of them are painted bad. uh, you have to be objective. That's the key word, is objectivity. You have to be objective. Approach the subject scientifically and not sentimentally. How are you going to apply this theory to literature? First of all, identify the female characters. Who are the women in, let's say, a novel, for example? Who are the women characters in this novel, female characters? And then classify them in terms of importance. Of these women, who are the major characters and the minor characters? Who are the static and the dynamic characters? And who are flat and round characters? You're analyzing the female characters only, of course, and then their roles in the plot and the action. Compare them with the male characters. Uh, who has the upper hand? Who has the authority? Who's passive? Who's active? Who's submissive? Who is the dominator? Who's the follower? Are women suffering from, absence of rights? Do they have rights? Are they struggling to get their rights? How have they been presented by the author? Negatively, positively? Is the author trying to communicate a message to the reader about feminism? What's the solution the author gives to this problem? These are all questions that should be answered when you are trying to apply this theory to a literary text. And it's not enough to answer them. You have to support them with the evidence from the novel, quotations, references to events and actions, critics, what other critics said about the novel. You can apply Elaine Schwalter's 3 phases. Is this novel about the first phase, the second phase, or the third phase? Are women presented as victims? Do they face emotional or physical abuse, inhibition, limitations? These are also questions you need to answer. And you can take feminism from what we've been doing is like I'm talking about the steps of how to apply this theory to a novel, for example, as far as the characters in the novel are concerned, the female characters, but you can take the author. Like if the author is a woman, how is she approaching this subject? So you can take it from the perspective of the author or from the perspective of the reader. Like uh, if the readers are female readers, how are they going to respond to the events in the novel? In this case, you're going to use an eclectic approach and mix feminism with reader response theory. We'll be talking about reader response theory in upcoming weeks. And that's called, if you merge two theories together, it would be an eclectic approach. And to know about reader response, you have to make like questionnaires and then get feedback. It's time to take a story and apply this theory to it. The Scarlet Letter is a novel written by the American novelist Nathaniel Hawthorne in the middle of the 19th century. This is one of the characters in the novel. Roger Chillingworth is an English scholar, an English scientist, living in the 17th. The setting is 17th century Boston, the town of Salem. Roger Chillingworth is an English, not an American, scholar. He lives in England with his wife, Hester Prynne. This is his wife, Hester Prynne. They're both English, living in England. He decides to go to America. At that time, everybody wanted to go to America, and for them, for several reasons. For one reason or another, he decided to take his wife and go to America, but he didn't really go with her to America. He told her, "I want you to go to America now, and then I'll follow you. I'll join you later on." He sends his wife to America and plans to join her later. We don't know why. In the novel, we're not given a reason. But it's very difficult at that time to, for a man to send his wife to another land, especially if it's a faraway country and newly discovered. America was just discovered. It's not like an established country, you feel safe, there's no problem. It's not like today, okay, honey, when you arrive, give me a call or text me. It's not like today. It's like sending somebody into the unknown. And it was not fair, for a husband to send his wife alone on this long voyage to a strange country. It was very difficult. He put his wife in a very difficult situation. When Hester arrived, in America, everybody was shocked and surprised. How can a woman come from Europe to America alone? Without her husband, without her father, without her brother, just alone. They asked her, "Where's your husband? Where's your father?" She said, "I came alone." "Why?" "My husband said, you go, and then I'll join you later." When she arrived, they were surprised. The Americans were surprised at her outspoken manner, her freedom. Like, for example, she was shaking hands with men, and for them at that time, in America, it was considered like a shame for a woman to shake hands with men. And they said that your clothes are too showy, too attractive. So imagine even the clothes she's wearing right now were considered at that time attractive, and a woman should not wear such loud clothes. They said, since you are alone, you came without your husband, and you don't have anybody here. Therefore, you have to stay with one of the families until your husband joins you, arrives. She said, "No, I don't want. I want to live alone." They said, how can a woman live alone, in a house? She said, I don't care, I'm going to live alone. So despite their advice, she decided to live alone. Everybody thought that this is quite shocking, very strange. Even shopping, she did shopping alone. Again, at that time, women were not allowed to go downtown and do shopping. Their husbands or brothers or fathers would do the shopping for them. Women stayed home, but since she was alone, she had to do it alone. Even farming, she did it alone, which was considered, again, shameful for a woman to farm. It should be, this is the job of a man, not a woman. Anyway, so she depended on herself in everything. And the question here is, do you blame her? Do you blame her for this? Well, as long as she's not doing anything wrong, I mean, why blame her? She's depending on herself. And besides, she did not run away from her husband or something. So you don't have to blame, you can't blame her. He asked her to go alone. She was just obeying him. You can blame him, but why blame her? So in American literature, Hester Prynne became the symbol of the independent woman. That's where feminism comes in. I mean, if you ask any American, do you know Hester Prynne? They'll say, of course, in America, she is the symbol of the independent woman, a woman who could rely on herself. Arthur Dimmesdale is another male character in the novel. He is the priest, the town priest, and every Sunday, Americans went to church to listen to his sermon. And Hester, of course, went to the church every Sunday, and she admired his sermons and his personality. And one day he visited her at her house, and she told him that she admired his sermons, and then she felt she had feelings for him. She was, she felt like she was in love with him, but he confessed to her that he has feelings for her, and she likewise did. So they realized that they are in love, but they decided not to see each other again because she's married, so they shouldn't see each other again. And that was a good decision until someday they kept this promise not to see each other again. But there was this news about an English ship coming to America, and the Indians attacked the ship and killed all the passengers on board. Now, on board of this ship, they found some possessions belonging to a man called Roger Chillingworth. Roger Chillingworth is Hester's husband, so the priest visited again. He visited, of course, we said they decided not to see each other, but he's the priest, so he has to visit her. He came to her house. He said, I came here as your priest. There is some bad news, and I have to tell you about it. He told her, we found this stuff with your husband's name on it. She said, yes, that's right. This is his stuff. This belongs to my husband. And since the Indians killed all the passengers on board, it means her husband is dead now. So now things have changed because now her husband is dead. So she said, can we get married? She asked him this question. Now that my husband is dead, I'll go through the mourning period. She has to go through mourning And she said, I don't care. It may take 1 month, 3 months. What's the mourning period for a widow? Is it 1 month? And until she gets married, 6 months, I'm ready to wait. He told her the problem is not like, it's not like what's the mourning period for a widow. It's like we don't have official evidence that he's dead. All what we found is his stuff with his name on it. You confirmed that this stuff belongs to him, but he's not officially considered dead because we don't have his body. We don't have a body. So no body, no marriage. She said, then what are you going? He's missing, not dead. Officially, he's considered missing, not dead. There's a big difference. And he told her, according to the law, if he remains missing for 7 years, then you are free. You can get married. Unfortunately, they could not hold their horses for 7 years. It was too long for them. So they had a secret affair. After they had the secret affair, a strange turn of events took place. The women, the neighbors, they started recognizing signs of pregnancy in Hester. So they reported her to the court, and the court summoned her to the court. They said, we have to see you, the judges. And they faced her with this question in the court. They said, are you pregnant? And she said, yes. So they said, who's the father? Because you have to be punished, not alone. We have to punish you and the man who did this to you. She said, I'm not going to reveal the identity of the father of my child. Ironically, Dimmesdale himself was at the court when she said that. And they asked him to ask her because he's her priest. So imagine the situation. He's asking her about the father. And she told him, I'm not going to tell you. Of course, it's him. He's asking about himself. I mean, this is very, very highly charged with irony. I mean, these incidents. So he felt guilty and he visited her. They put her in prison, and he visited her in jail, and he told her, like, I'm feeling guilty. I can't see you suffering like this. Give me permission to confess. I want to confess. She said, no, don't, because that's the reason why they're keeping me alive. They're keeping me alive because they want to know, they have hope to know who you are, the father. If they know, then they will kill us both. So it's better not to tell them. So he promised her not to tell them, not to confess. She gave birth inside the prison to a little girl. She called her Pearl. Finally, they decided to release her from prison. They decided not to kill her because they said, if we kill her, we will end her suffering. We want her to continue to suffer for the rest of her life. We want her to die every day until she really dies. And we also want her to be a living example for the other women in the town. Like, if we kill her now, people will forget her. But if women keep seeing her every day, they will remember this sin, and they will be better warned and more afraid. The judges wanted her to be a living example of shame. So they gathered everybody on the town square. They put her on the scaffold, and they said, for the rest of your life, you have to wear the scarlet letter A, which stands for adultery. You have to put it on your chest and never to take it off. Wherever you go, you have to wear this letter. That was her punishment. And we learn that her husband is not really dead, was not killed by the Indians. The Indians, yes, killed everybody uh, on board of the ship except him, because he was a doctor and they needed him. So they took him to their tribe, and finally he managed to convince them to let him go. So they released him. When he came to the town, he was shocked when he saw his wife with a baby in her arm standing on the scaffold, accused of being an adulteress. And he decided to hide his identity. The reason why he tried to hide his identity was not only because he felt ashamed of what his wife did, it's also because he wanted to know who the father is. And if he revealed his identity, it would be very difficult to know. So he kept his identity a secret and decided to meet the men. And because who's the father? It must be one of these men, right? So he started socializing with men to know who exactly the father is. He paid her a visit at home. He told her, "Tell me, who's your lover?" She said, "I'm not going to tell you." He said, "Okay, if you don't tell me, I will know. I have my ways, and I don't want you to tell anybody that I'm your husband. If you do that, I'm going to kill you." So he threatened her. Later on, he made friends with the priest, but he noticed there are signs of guilt, and he started suspecting that it's the priest, until he finally found out that it's the priest, because one night he sneaked into the priest's into Dimmesdale's chamber, and he noticed the letter A on his chest, because he himself carved the letter A on his chest, the priest, I mean. And when Chillingworth saw that, he realized that it's the priest. He knew that. So he decided not to kill him immediately. He decided to torture him to death, uh, because he was consumed with his desire for revenge. Dimmesdale felt that he is a big hypocrite and felt guilty because he's every Sunday he preaches against sin, not to commit adultery, and while he himself is a sinner. So his sense of guilt and hypocrisy got the better of him. He stopped eating and drinking, and he started, getting thinner and thinner and lost his health until one day he decided to confess. So he walked on, he gathered the people around him, went to the town square, stood on the same scaffold she was placed at the beginning of the story, and confessed to everyone that he is the father of Hester's child. After this confession, he immediately fell and died on the spot because he was already too sick. His sense of guilt ate him up, consumed him. After his death, Hester took her daughter, and of course, her husband left her. Hester took her daughter and went to Europe. Years after that, she came back to the same town in Boston. We learn from the story that her daughter continued to live in Europe and married a young, handsome man there, rich and all that. So she lived happily ever after. Hester also spent the rest of her life in the same town in Salem, still wearing the same letter, the letter A. But as Hawthorne says at the end of the novel, he says this letter, which at the beginning of the novel indicated adultery, now it refers to her as an angel. So it stands for angel, while at the beginning of the story, it stood for adulteress. This is what we call in literature a dynamic symbol. Hawthorne is the first American writer who uses dynamic symbolism. dynamic symbol is a symbol that changes its meaning throughout the text. It's not like a static symbol that means the same throughout the literary text. So finally, Hester proved to herself and proved to society that she's able to repent. And this is an example of a woman who stood on her own feet, did not give up despite everything that happened, and managed to raise her child and at the same time repent for her sin. I mean, she was not like, okay, I sinned, I deserve to die. It's like she said, okay, I sinned, but God can give me a chance and can forgive me. And I have to prove worthy of God's forgiveness. And I have to do everything to repent. She spent the rest of her life helping people, charity work. Um, yeah, and the story also shows you how society treats women in a very, unfair way. So she's, yes, a victim of a patriarchal system. So thank you very much for attending. This was a very good example of how we apply this theory to a literary text, focusing on the character of Hester and Hester as a victim of a patriarchal society, as you said, but also how she tried to stand on her feet, struggle for her rights, and finally emerged a heroine with the letter A. She's now proud of this letter because, as she said in the novel, she said, "This letter is not a symbol of my shame. It's a symbol of men's shame who put it on me." That's what she says in the novel. Well, thank you very much again for attending, and see you next week. Have a great day.